All right, let's get started. Welcome to Comsverse. Welcome to this session called MTR Case Study, UK's largest deployment in WP. This session is presented by Alex McKnight. Alex, the floor is yours.
Thanks there. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. So what we're going to run through today is around the Microsoft Teams Room case study. And this is for the Department of Work and Pensions, which is a UK government department and a large one at that. So I'm going to run through. And to kick us off with, I just wanted to thank the sponsors for Comsverse. Without their input, this wouldn't be happening. I think it's a great testament to all the hard work that everyone's put in, and that the passion that people have around UC. So just before we kick off as well, there is a chance to get some merchandise and some swag. So go to swagit.io/8757 to win yourself a Lego Yoda. So what more could you want? Go grab that there now. I'll come back to that later on, and we'll get the info for that put into the chat, I'm sure, shortly. The draw for this will be in the Q&A afterwards, so that's your plug to come join us afterwards for a bit of chat. So moving on to the main subject of the day, really we've got Department of Work and Pensions. So they are looking after things like universal credit for people who are out of work or looking for support from the government. They've got around about 90,000 people that they employ around the UK, from job centres to kind of early start centres, and all of their corporate and kind of telephony call centres for the UK government. So a massive organisation, lots and lots of interworking amongst other departments as well. The deployment I'll be talking about today is really around how we worked with the DWP to get the 350 MTR meeting rooms deployed across the UK. And I'll show you some of the scope in a moment around where they actually ended up landing as well. And this was delivered in a really short span and time frame. They previously had about 270 old legacy units of video conferencing, a really poor user experience, and an aging platform that they needed to get off. So they wanted to move and align with the Microsoft strategy around Teams and get their meeting rooms fit for purpose and able to reduce some of the travel that people were having around the country to kind of join up offices and basically allow their staff to collaborate more effectively. So some of the rooms that we did, we split it into a couple of phases. So the first phase was 290 MTR, and that was to replace the initial 270 old kind of Hamburg units, and also add some extra capability where the business had already asked. And then we moved into phase 2, which was totaling up to 350 of the MTR units, which finished essentially just before the lockdown this year. So it was a race to get the last units in and ready to go prior to potentially travel being curtailed across the UK. So the phase 1, it was actually a 12-week delivery to get 290 MTRs deployed, and that was from Penzance down in Cornwall right the way up to Lerwick in Shetland, where we had engineers on ferries with kit going across the sea up to the islands to do the installs. Massive undertaking logistically, and I think it's testament to kind of a combined team with DWP, Simity, and AV Partner, which had some engineering and all the logistics for getting guys in vans to places. The phase 2, where we added the further 60 rooms, they were essentially net new, so increasing capacity for DWP, where they had real good business cases. And we had a mixture of kind of standard rooms, which are small, medium, large rooms, and also the more kind of complex AV, which got on this picture here. We've got one that's up in London, which is in their kind of Caxton house, which is a central place for them, with ceiling audio, projection, and multi-cameras, so they could do presentations, remote training, and things like that. So the overall scope on the map here, you can see where the MTRs landed. We had Northern Ireland, we had Scotland, we had Wales, England, everything throughout the UK and NI. And it was basically broken down into geographical regions as to how we rolled it out. As you can see, kept broadly on track with getting how the rooms landed. A few little dips and bumps in there along the way, where we ended up with essentially a race against time to get the MTRs built. One of the key things with the DWP deployment is that the build on the MTRs was actually a custom build based on their security baseline that they wanted to use on the Windows 10 platform. And then working with ourselves, we basically rebuilt that MTR image from the DWP based Windows 10 security image, layered on the applications and the drivers and all of the other elements within that kind of MTR build. And basically, as you can see on the picture there, that there's each room was specifically configured to land a particular MTR. So we had to make sure that logistically that box landed in that room on that day for it to be a successful install. So a large piece of logistics to get this one out the door. It wasn't just off the shelf and plug it in. It's very much domain joined. It was very much around making sure that the accounts that were logged in, that the IP addresses and everything on the network side was all lined up to the DWP specification. The peripherals that we used on these, on the small and medium rooms, it was the Logitech Meetup, which provided a really kind of simple, compact design to go in with the rooms. And then on the larger rooms, it was the Logitech Rally Kit, which gives you the hubs and the cabling through a Cat6, Cat7 cable. Once we went then into the more complex AV, we were looking at the BIAMP systems along with the kind of the certified USB connection, which allowed the extensibility, multi-cameras to be switched. So you could have a presenter camera at the rear of the room, looking at some of the larger areas, and also the camera at the front for more standard video conferencing. One of the key things around the more complex rooms that we looked at was to make sure that there was a standard set of common components that would be used, and that would allow you to then flex that room. So for example, if you've got a BIAMP Sierra Forte in there, and you're using the same sets of microphones and speakers, you can extend those microphones and speakers depending on the size of that custom room. We would look at having essentially a Crestron touch panel for room layout options in some of the complex rooms where they would want to have zoning for microphones, or they wanted to have a split room, so you can have auto sensors on doors. The key aim for all of it is to keep the user experience as king. So absolutely less is more. The more things that the user has to remember and do differently in each room, so the harder that experience becomes. And to wrap all of this, the training that goes around it is all focused on that MTR interface. It's the same whether it's a small room or a complex room, as to how you start your calls, how you join, and how you work with the kind of the telephony and the conferencing on that room. So it's really key that we didn't add anything in there that didn't need to be, and making sure that as much of the components, the setups, the blueprints is all reusable, because obviously going forwards, this whole estate needs to be managed and it's massively geographically dispersed. So it's really key to make sure that the service team, through Azure monitoring, can make sure that the components are understood, that they've got the state of what they are, and how that all hangs together. So I wanted to share some of the room kind of finished options that we had on here. So as you can see on the left-hand side of the slides you've got there, there's one of my favorite rooms that we actually put together on this was around a round table. It was a kind of a donut-shaped table, as you can see there, with 4 displays around the room. So wherever you sat in that room, you could see a display, and they were set slightly higher than we would normally do, so that you can see over the head of somebody opposite the table. And then in the center of that table, you've got the Poly round table camera and integrated mics. And what that lets you do was it basically can give you that full round table. And as you can see at the top picture there, where you've got the stitched together video on a Skype for Business call here, it actually gives you that panoramic, everyone sitting from left to right, looking like it's a single long room. And it's the first time really that camera and solution I've seen where the room was built and that camera fits absolutely bang on in it. It's a fantastic room. People really love using it. It gives you that really immersive in-room experience, but also participants in the room who are looking at people remotely get a really great experience. On some of the other images we've got there, you're looking at the Lenovo was the key bread and butter MTR component we used. One of the key reasons around that was a lot of the cable management, the ability to clamp it shut at the back, the robustness of the device, and also the fact it's absolutely kind of bulletproof. All of the compute from Lenovo, we had very, very few issues with the Lenovo devices, considering there's over 350 of these sent out in short order. Lenovo being great, Logitech have been great as far as partners to work with on getting these rooms and all of that kit out from the kind of stock and into the right place. So the way we kind of broke it down with the deployment was that DWP had communications and change management teams internal in-house. We worked with them to look at kind of templating and how we could make sure that the stakeholders were engaged properly. The key elements that we've kind of brought to the party on this project was around the end-to-end solution design, making sure that the Office 365 Teams, Exchange, and all the kind of a network config and understanding was there, and really driven into the low-level designs. The kind of Teams network assessment, making sure that that was understood across their DWP network and how that's going to impact potentially additional traffic. Because one of the key things for driving up the adoption is you're obviously going to be getting more usage often, and going from an old school VC that wasn't used that much to essentially an immersive and exciting experience for a lot of users, that really needed to be understood. So we worked around the blueprints as well, making sure that we had those designs and understanding that it was a reusable and kind of cookie cutter approach rather than it being a build a room from scratch every time, which obviously doesn't scale particularly well and supportability really suffers. And then the adoption and training. So we ran essentially 2 remote training sessions every day, and also 3 days a week we had on-site training sessions and drop-in areas for staff in the large hubs. So it really made sure that they got the communications out. They had on-demand video, bite-sized training. They had virtual sessions that they could jump in, and we'd make sure that the comms went out well ahead of time, so that as those rooms came into their offices, they'd understand and could actually often go into that room and use the room to experience the training as well through a single one-click join. I must say, when people have had a bad experience with the technology and then they get an MTR and it's been delivered and it's slick and the training's there for them, to see their faces light up with, wow, I can't believe this has come to our office, is something that is really quite a powerful reminder of what we're doing here. It does fundamentally change people's daily life in how they can communicate with their colleagues. We've had people who were previously driving a couple of hours to get to a video conferencing unit to then make a call to somebody further up country. This now allowed them to do it and save them hours in their day and missing traffic and everything else. So for them, really, really changing to what they do and what they can get done during the day. We made sure that the kind of Azure and OMS monitoring was in place, that the right dashboards available for their teams, and they can really understand what's going on the estate. So something which is really key for them is to make sure that these rooms don't fall out of support, or they don't have issues where they're not being kind of proactively managed, and then provided that early life support to help with the kind of initial teething issues that might come through, or where you've got usability challenges. We can really address that and get on top of it early. And then the AV vendor, which is Stone AV in this scenario, which was basically DWP wanted to leverage the equipment buying that they'd had with the previous contractor, so we used that incumbent, and then the equipment supply through them as well. So it's a real multi input team to deliver this. And as with everything around what looks like a simple slick room at the end of the day, there's a ton of work that goes on below the surface, and it really is key to make sure that you understand that full kind of holistic package when putting in MTRs. It's more than just a kit putting on desks. So here's another one of the kind of small rooms. You've got your HDMI input on the cable. DWP wanted to make sure that it was essentially a cabled input for content sharing on the HDMI, and then we've got the meetup on the wall that does the audio video, and also with the driver updates and the latest kind of AI side of things, you've got the auto group tracking, which is the same for the meetup, and also on the rally cameras as well. You've got group tracking cameras that really frame the conversation in the room well. Okay, I'm just going to play a little quick video now, which hopefully the sound will come through okay for you. So we'll try this. And this is just essentially the case study around the DWP.
It's really transformed the way that we work and collaborate.
We've got the government organisations looking at what we're doing and are very keen to emulate our success.
It's been an incredible transformation.
They had before a legacy VC system which had very small displays, often had technical issues with people wasting a lot of time.
The Lenovo Hub 500 is flexible, scalable and accessible for all our users across the country.
We have offices
Had technical.
The Lenovo Hub 500 is flexible, scalable and accessible for all our users across the country.
We have offices.
So we'll bin that one there, as that seems to be having some issues. I'll send the link out later on for that one, which basically shows you how that moves forward. But essentially, the key things that we wanted to kind of touch on today is around. We tend to break down that the video, it's the MTR deployments themselves. You need to have 4 key streams really around your delivery, making sure that you've got a joined up end-to-end process. That the key stakeholders are really engaged early, and that the kind of project management side of it is understood. We need to also make sure that the blueprints and the technical solution side of things are where they need to be, and it's a reusable and using off-the-shelf where possible components that are obviously making sure they're all kind of Microsoft certified, that they're going to be the roadmap for those components is working as you'd expect. Second piece on that, following on the complex side, is it can often be kind of tempting to go off down a rabbit warren of what's the possible kind of options and technology that you can put in there, and really building out these complex rooms to a point where they're all so custom that each room need to have a unique understanding of that room to be able to support it. Which brings you neatly on around to the support side of things. You're making sure that you've got your support staff trained and understood really is key to make sure that those people can support the ongoing environment of which the MTR is deployed into. And then on the training side of things, too often you end up with a meeting room that basically gets, the kit gets deployed, engineers walk away, and then that organization is left to manage that meeting or that meeting room kind of on their own. And it's really key to make sure that you've got a vendor that can support and work with that team in both the training and upskilling around how to support MTR, because it's not a standard VC system. It is basically a device that's a Windows 10 device. It's going to be there in a kiosk mode, and it's got USB peripherals around it. It's essentially how that kind of the architecture ties together. And you've got to make sure that the folks who are supporting it really understand that. So we do often like an early life support kind of training and bringing the on-site teams or the company that you're providing the service for, their team, up to a level where they can do the vast majority of all of the support activities themselves in-house, making sure that there's updates using the kind of Azure and OMS monitoring, and making sure that the drivers and firmwares and things are kept up to date and managed. And then to be able to provide a service where you can take that kind of tier 3 or 4 and provide that remote support to help with smart hands on site, etc. So they're the kind of some of the key kind of 4 streams that we look at. There's the delivery, the solution, the adoption, and also the service. With the MTR, obviously, it's kind of a rapidly changing environment. So every 3 to 6 months, you've got new things coming to the market, changes to how the MTR works, and making sure that that organization isn't left with out-of-date training and materials and tying it in. So you've actually got an ongoing relationship to make sure that the materials are up to date, the training can be updated, and allow that the organization can understand and embrace that new functionality that's enabled in there. One of the things that often comes up is around kind of the content sharing element on an MTR. So for example, if you've got the HDMI input into the MTR, that's often the standard way of that people expect it, but more often than not, people are also looking for like a wireless solution as well. And there's two ways in which you can do wireless, generally speaking, with an MTR. One of them is around you can join your device, be it a laptop or a Surface Pro, into the meeting, and you can use a Bluetooth beaconing, which will allow your device to see that there's an MTR nearby, and it can then join the Teams call with the essentially sound and video off on your device, and lets you share content via the Teams conference. Or you can have a more traditional kind of Wi-Fi dongle sharing solution or wireless sharing solution. But one of the challenges with that, which is something that's really worth taking into account, is the problem with the MTR then going to sleep or not going to sleep when it's got an active signal connected in. So you have to have an element of some switching in there that auto switches between the HDMI or the wireless, and also the ability that your wireless content sharing solution supports that sleep on HDMI. So with DWP, we basically wanted to look at the options around that, and they decided that for usability and simplicity, and also that kind of simplifying the support process, an HDMI cable at the point where the MTR is absolutely fine. And that's what people have been used to previously, and it basically meant that the training could be simplified, that we were using out of the box functionality. We didn't have any of the security concerns around the Wi-Fi and wireless sharing side of things, and it may well be that in the future, in future upgrades, that the wireless sharing piece certainly plays its part, quite possibly in the larger presentation areas where you can present from anywhere in the room. With the presentation on some of the large rooms, having a rear camera, so you can have the multi-camera in there, allowed you to have essentially presets on the camera. So you could have the front view of everyone in the room and the display, and then you could also have the left and right, depending on where the presenter is going to be, and be able to switch that midway through the call, which is a fantastic use case for them, and allowed them to do essentially team calls between their Leeds, Manchester, and also London sites on a daily basis, where previously it had been an audio conference where people would just jump onto the spider phone. It'd be potentially poor audio, they couldn't see what's going on. If you had any agile project boards where you wanted to visually show things that were going on in an office, they could now be basically brought in front of the camera, and you could have presets for the presenter, and then also onto an agile board and zoom in on areas where they might be doing something in paper still, but also the whiteboarding features in there that let you do collaboration with the smaller teams in their collaboration rooms, which they would have in Manchester. We set them up there with multi-cameras in those rooms, and also London. There was 5 rooms that were set up there for the Universal Credit team, where they were doing like whiteboarding in rooms, and they could instantly jump into a call, which would jump the guys and gals in Manchester into that call. And they could then have whiteboarding sessions where they've got big white rooms where they'll be writing on walls to do brainstorming sessions, and that could be captured on video, and they could talk about it whilst it then gets documented and brought together through OneNote, and also within the call itself on the kind of interactive whiteboards. So it really gave them flexibility, which is key to them, and helped bring their teams together. They'd, before this point, had teams that worked broadly in isolation with some calls and a few people moving between offices, and this really made a huge difference to being able to join up the offices that they have around the country. So I'm going to try and get back to the one of the map on there, because that was a there we go. So when we were doing the rollout with this, obviously there's a ton of offices, and a lot of these are job centres as well as kind of DWP kind of core infrastructure sites where they've got either support services or they've got call centres and things like that. What we wanted to make sure was that when it was being rolled out, it was geographically rolled out, so that not only that supported the job centre and job centre plus operational regions where those offices could all then talk to each other, but also that the logistics for the delivery of essentially folks in vans being able to get to site to do the install. And we're talking 3 rooms a day, potentially at 3 separate sites. And we had 4 engineering teams doing 3 rooms a day, Monday to Friday, So a lot of long days, and making sure that the right device was in the right van, going to the right location, and getting all the access. So a huge logistical challenge. Fantastic to be able to have all the kit in central warehousing, making sure we had teams deployed, making sure that the ferries, for example, were going out on the right day to make sure that once you got up to Shetland, you had a trip back home again to get you back in time. The key things that we kind of came through on this around kind of like lessons learned and stuff like that was very much around making sure that the drivers and the update cycle that you're going to look at is really key, and understanding that it's not just a point in time. It gets deployed, but you then need to manage it. And what does that look like? What's the risks associated with not doing something? What's the risks with making sure that it's automatically updated, or do you do it through kind of an SCCM push update? So all of the images on the MTRs were basically sent through SCCM as an image. It got built out. It then had applied with the various settings and configurations that were required. Network security layer applied to make sure that it would only work in the appropriate office and location, and then that would get shipped out. Likewise with peripherals, we had to make sure that all of the firmware coming out of the factory, because it's coming from at different times, potentially comes on different firmware levels. So we wanted to make sure it was all up to date before it went in. So there was the kind of the test and the firmware update on that. And then making sure that the data you're getting from those devices is actually fed into Azure so that you can monitor it effectively. There's a number of hooks on an MTR that you can essentially hook into the Azure and OMS. We want to make sure that the heartbeat's running on it. Now, is that device online? Is it working? Is it showing the screen? Are the peripherals showing us on? When was the last time that this thing rebooted? What's the memory and the CPU? So all the things that you can get out of a device, we want to make sure that that's being monitored, that you've got the right alarming. And with the kind of Azure monitoring, there's two elements to it. There's one that the service team use for the monitoring side of things, which I've just kind of talked through there. But there's also the reporting side of it, which goes to maybe the service owner. So they can have a broad dashboard view and make sure that the estate is being utilized. So how many calls are being put through that? What's the kind of the general usage of those different rooms? Because not all rooms are made equal, and you may have a room that's a let's say a 20-person room, but often you're getting 2 people that are using that room for video. So some training around that to free up some resources and allow maybe where one person's going into a room, maybe they can do that off their personal device. They don't need to book the whole room out and then take a 20-person room off the estate. So that's kind of one of the key things, and making sure that that room booking is integrated into Exchange, so that when you book it through Outlook, you create the Skype or Teams meeting, and that then is reflected on the room booking, but also you get the touch to join. And that one-click join on the MTR is absolutely the biggest lifesaver when it comes to end user kind of usability, and making sure that people can pick those rooms, go in there, start the meeting in minutes, not spending the first quarter of an hour trying to figure out the technology. The other piece that we looked at around that user experience side of things is to basically remove remote controls out of the rooms. So the cameras, we want auto group framing. We don't want to have a Zoom remote control. A, they go walkies. B, people don't know how to necessarily use it. And C, they'll then set the camera pointing at the wall and leave the room. And potentially all the presets are then messed up for the next person coming in. So those go. The display screens, the settings on those, we made sure were locked down so that it would automatically go to sleep, wake up from the MTR when the motion sensor in the Lenovo picks up movement in the room, comes back to life. But you couldn't turn it off, change the channel, change the inputs, all of that kind of stuff. So those remotes went. The only interface that you needed to know about was the MTR, and the rest of the room came to life, did its thing, and then went to sleep again. So making sure that user experience is absolutely simple as possible, and that as much of it is robust and automated as possible is absolutely crucial. We tend to, you can see on the picture there with the stacked boxes of Lenovo's, we've also put what we call a quick reference guide in the rooms, which basically is a snapshot of some of the key functions that that room can do. So make a call, join a conference, make a dial out call. And that would tie in exactly with what they can get on demand on the intranet site with the bite-sized videos and what they've been shown in the meeting room, excuse me, meeting room training sessions. So that's kind of an aid memoir. Generally speaking, if you don't put those in the room, people want them. If you do put them in the room, people sometimes glance at it, but not as often as they'd like to think they do. Because actually, once you've used these, well, once, maybe twice, you're quite at home. And it ties in with what you're seeing on the Skype Business and Teams as well. Just going to just jump through on slides, try and miss the video out so we don't get that playing back. Okay. So I think the key things that we found around kind of the lessons for DWP on that project were, don't underestimate the pre-planning required to make sure that the scale of the endeavour is understood. You need to put a stake in the ground to get things moving when you've got this level of logistics, and you need to have a timeline that you're going to try and stick to. But also, what's your plan B? Like with any kind of good project that has this level of items, there are things that are going to come up and bite you in the ass as you're doing these things. Making sure that you've got a great team around you that can have the knowledge, that have ingenuity, and that can take the challenges as they come and look at how we can then reshape certain elements to make sure that the timeline is still being driven is absolutely key. Making sure that you've got a key sponsorship early on. Make sure security is engaged early. Make sure your comms and training is articulated with the change management folks or the users within the organization early. You don't want these things to be, oh, by the way, on Monday we're putting this in your office, and that's the first someone hears of it. So the adoption, making sure that all of those user peripherals are in place and tested, and that the room and the hardware is absolutely bulletproof, fundamental to making sure that this stuff rolls out smoothly. And with the MTR, putting in a custom build caused a lot of early pain to make sure that it was going to be doing what was said in the tin. I would certainly advocate, I think, where Microsoft have done their testing, where they've got the build that works, if you can use that as is and make sure that the updates are managed in a way, then that's probably the preferable way of doing it. Where you do need to go and essentially rebuild from the OS up to create an image for a client, making sure that then the process of how that's going to be kept up to date is understood is really key. And it's a lot of the work that we did early on is making sure that they have a periodical refresh of what that image looks like, and making sure that the right updates and drivers and patches, etc., are applied. And going forwards, as the Teams and Office 365 matures within organizations, I think this auto update as a device is going to become more and more prevalent to make sure that the latest is applied to those devices. Things that seem like a petty and small issue, such as cable management, such as making sure that devices are essentially installed within the room to a high quality, is absolutely key to how long that room will stay in a usable state before you need to have a service call out on it because of an issue. So as an example, making sure that the cables are secured in the back of the device, so that device isn't going to get pulled as people want to try and bring either the touch panel closer to them, or that the table gets pulled because they want to reshuffle that room around, but actually you've got cabling going into a floor box underneath. In the requirements for that room, it's absolutely key that you understand how that room is going to be used, because again, a meeting room is not just a room and you stick a device in and walk away. That's a recipe for disaster. So we need to understand where you've got rooms that need to have flexible furniture in, for example, but where does that MTR sit, and how does the cable management, if you've got that going to the table, how does that work? How does that unplug up the floor box? How does essentially facilities or users themselves are able to move that furniture around, those tables around, and making sure that when it gets plugged back together again, it just fires up and works first time. So really understanding the dynamics of the room are crucial, especially in the more complex rooms, as to how it's going to work. One of the rooms that we did for this was a 4-in-1 room with a set of movable walls that came backwards and forwards. And you've got 4 MTRs on that, and you've got ceiling speakers, ceiling microphones, and a large projection screen at one end. And the key to that was that having like an optical sensor, for example, where the walls move back, allowed the the brains of the room, if you like, to the processor there to be able to understand what configuration that room's in. That automatically then said, ignore MTR 4 or 3 because the room's set in an extended mode. So now this is going to be your master MTR controller. All the peripherals then hook into that MTR, and you use the room in exactly the same way as if it was one large room, but this is going to be the primary. So understanding how that works and making sure that the users who are room owners in that area understand. But the key thing for that was that they didn't have to touch anything. They moved the wall back like they did normally. The MTR was already set up because of the optical sensors that you got in the room. And those optical sensors, they don't have contacts on them, in the traditional sense, so they don't get worn down and broken in the same way where you've got something that wears out and then the automation fails. And there's nothing worse than automation failing when there's not a manual workaround potentially. So it's got to be robust, it's got to be tested and understood, and the use case of that room has to really resonate with how people are actually going to use it in the real world for that room to be successful. I think one of the other areas that we've added in, it's not so much MTR, but it's a kind of a bring your own device, because a lot of these peripherals, such as the meetup, allow you to plug it into a Surface Pro or a laptop and use it as essentially a large peripheral. So we found in some rooms which maybe historically were seen as a two-person meeting room and may have had someone trying to wedge a video conferencing system into it, some of those smaller rooms you can really enable for Teams by having them as BYOD with a display and a integrated camera and speaker peripheral presented to USB or via a docking station with a USB-C on it. So that's something to bear in mind if you're looking at kind of multiple very small rooms where they've got small little huddles. It may not be bookable. It's probably going to be more like a hot drop space. Putting in a BYOD option in there and keeping your MTRs for the more kind of meeting room specific use cases rather than that kind of hot non-bookable drop space is really key. And something that I've seen recently that was really worth thinking about as well is where you've got maybe furniture pods that are open-sided without a top on. Try and avoid putting the big video conferencing kind of speaker bars in open plan offices where there's no kind of acoustic shielding around it. Not only does it annoy everyone around them and you can't really have private conversations, but it actually detracts from the user experience and people's love of the systems will deteriorate if they're constantly being interrupted by someone having a conference essentially on a sofa next to them. So sure that the kit you're putting in is the right kit for the space and the use case that you're looking at. It's really critical to make sure that it's not just one size fits all, but that you've got your profiles as to how those rooms are going to be set, be that based on size, but also use case, and making sure the kit is then essentially a blueprint version of that, but you apply the appropriate blueprint to the appropriate space. So within the DWP example here, out of that 350 rooms, there was probably about 45% of them were the kind of a large room. We had about 35% were this kind of small rooms, and then we had final remainders were a mixture of kind of complex or kind of hybrid rooms as well. So you need to understand what the spread is and understand what the kit is and how they align. And it's really key to make sure that you've got the appropriate kit. So what you don't want to be doing is thinking, well, it's a bit cheaper, so we'll go for a kind of a medium room. We'll try and wedge it into a large space. All you're likely to do is to impact the user experience, and people will then feel less inclined to want to use that room anyway because the sound pickup's not right. Or you'll get a lot of support calls in saying that the sound doesn't work. Well, actually, it does. It's just not scaled for the right space. So understanding the kit that you're going to be putting in, making sure that those peripherals work is absolutely fundamental to a successful installation. So that's kind of in a nutshell where we went with the DWP kind of journey. It's a massive project undertaking. There was a lot of kit that needed to be removed, like old kit, and recycled into the kind of the WE initiatives, and making sure that kit went to the appropriate disposal options, making sure that the new kit came in, making sure that all of the network and all of the underlying infrastructure that is, on a government department, substantial, a lot of barriers to overcome to make sure that it talks to each other in the right places. making sure that the adoption and the training was landing with people, that people were turning up and understanding it and getting it out, and getting good feedback on that is absolutely key and crucial. And then making sure the service team are able to pick up as rooms are landing. We're talking landing, potentially 40 rooms in a week. So the service team needed to really be ready to catch the ball, and we provided extra support around that to help them skill up. And that the automation and the reporting and that the kind of ongoing updates and everything are understood in a way that can really bring all of that together. So when you get to the end of the day and you can look back and say, that's 350 rooms that were deployed in basically a 12-week period for the first 250, and then about a month for the phase 2. That's massive change for an organization. And have they embraced it? Absolutely. Is it something now that people can just drop in and use? Absolutely. So from that perspective, it's had a massively positive impact on how DWP can talk to each other amongst sites, between sites and people, which was a capability they didn't really have previously. So that's pretty much the end of the kind of the overview around the DWP. I'm more than happy to take some questions in Q&A, and I'll probably finish there for the kind of the presentation side of things. I'm just going to skip through and see if we can get back to the swag item that we've got on there. So just remember 8757 and the swagit.io, and you can win yourself a Yoda. So feel the force and type in your number. And we will go on to the Q&A shortly. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen. Hopefully that was some useful and interesting for you, and more than happy to answer some questions in the Q&A session.
Okay, thank you, Alex. There are some questions in the Q&A, so let's dive into those.
Okay.
So first question is, would DWP be prepared to host events for other organizations to demonstrate the wow impact of the excellent MTRs?
So I think, yes, it would be the an initial answer to that. I think it would, obviously, we need to qualify that and understand what the ask is. But certainly, other government departments have seen what's been done there, and that's been an impressive piece for them to understand. But yeah, feel free to share some details afterwards and see what we can do to set something up.
All right. So second question is, what factors led to the DWP choosing a Lenovo ThinkSmart Hub 500 over competing options like Polycom, Yealink, and other ones?
Sure. So the work around understanding which MTR was going to be used, and bearing in mind that the initial discovery phase around this was a little while back now. So what was on the market at the time was more limited than it is right now. And the options that came around it were very much about making sure that the compute unit was from a vendor where compute is what they do, making sure that the cable management was an absolutely crucial element for them. So often these devices are put into offices which have quite a kind of workforce that's moving around, that's in big offices or potentially in kind of job centers and things. So everything needs to be lockable, it needs to be robust, and it needs to be in a way to try and minimize the amount of support impacts we're going to have. And the Lenovo, with its essentially lockable kind of flap on the back, where your cables come out and it can be clamped in and secured with like Kensington locks, etc., was seen as a real plus on that. And when they were put into pilots, we had a few different vendors in the mix for the pilots, and the Lenovo came out as being the simplest one to rig up, to lock down, and give that kind of professional feel. So that's kind of why that was chosen.
All right. We have another question here. How did you configure the 4 displays with the Hub 500 HDMI splitter?
Okay, so for these guys, the if there was should we say a table where you wanted to have multiple inputs, you would have an HDMI active splitter that would be something like an Extron underneath the table, where you'd have cubbies with the HDMI inputs going in. They connect to that splitter, and then it'd be the last one that's plugged in is what sends a signal, and that goes to the ingest on the HDMI for the MTR. The DWP didn't want to have the kind of the wireless content sharing at this point in time, but it was certainly something that went through on the blueprint discussions around how that could be achieved and what that would look like. They opted for the essentially keep to the cable, keep it simple, which I think for the scale and the size and the rapidity of the deployment, that was something that was certainly a good thing to be doing early on. And also they would like to see, and I think it's probably echoed in a number of folks, is the wireless present option with MTR. It would be much better if that was something that was native, rather than it being essentially an add-on bolt-on for every single room.
All right, thank you. So the next question is, how has COVID-19 impacted the way in which the organization works? Has there been a shift to much more laptop communication process?
Yeah, great question. I think it's, as with everyone, it's impacted you somehow. And I think the key thing with DWP is that obviously they're supporting an awful lot of more claimants around like furlough schemes and things like that as well. So their frontline staff have had to massively scale with bringing in people from other areas of the department to better support that massive drive to support the UK public. It has led to essentially, as far as lockdown goes, a lot of people working from home. So they've been rolling out with the fast tracking Teams with telephony on Teams as well, and where they've got elements using Skype for Business as well. So there is a lot more laptop use. There's a lot more people using it for daily communication. As people come back into the offices, their world now revolves more around kind of Teams and Skype for Business. And so they're going to be wanting to join up with meetings with people who are still working at different sites or working remotely. So I think it changes the way that perhaps people were having just a meeting in a room. You've now got people who are going to be having a meeting in a room with maybe 40% of the workforce that's still going to be working from home. So you need to have that space to be able to bring meetings together. And it's going to be a mixture of laptop to laptop and also meeting room laptops. The key thing with this is that it allows people to join from any device. It gives them options. So I think, yeah, the jury's out on exactly how the ongoing impact is going to be, let's say, post-Christmas. But I think certainly it will change the dynamics, but it's not a reason to not have meeting rooms. These spaces are where people really can get together in a socially acceptable way, but working with colleagues who are still maybe not in the office.
All right, thank you. So there are two more questions. So why was there a need to make a custom image? Until now, I was under the impression that it was a big no-go for Microsoft. That's not allowed. Maybe some insights there.
Sure. So it is a supported configuration. You can basically get the instructions of how to build an image for an MTR, if you like. The reason that they wanted to do it, and it's been a debate. It's gone looking at the pros and cons on it. And the key thing that they wanted to have was that if it's going to be Windows 10, that it was going to be a supported Windows 10 version that their security and networks were happy with. Was they understood it inside out. Their initial reticence to say we're going to take off the shelf is that what's going to be the impact of auto updates? What could potentially get sent onto the network from Microsoft to do updates, and that build itself, we don't know necessarily what's been done to that image as far as an off the shelf. So it hadn't gone through all of the penetration and attack testing that they wanted to have to sign off. So they wanted to go with essentially, this is our bulletproof build. This is what we're happy with. You can then layer the Microsoft app on top of that. So that was the kind of the discussion that was had. It does introduce other challenges that you need to get around. So keeping things up to date, compatibility, supportability going forwards, etc. I think generally speaking, most of our clients would be using the off the shelf and then looking at how you harden that appropriately against the security risk profile. On this occasion, that was a stipulation. So that's what we were working with. Going forwards, we've got a process to make sure that it's using the latest version of Windows 10 from Microsoft that's certified, so it's going to be like a 1909 build, that it's got all of the appropriate monitoring, tracking, and add-ons onto that, and then that becomes the new package, and it's done periodically. So very much a security-driven conversation, a decision that is this device essentially a black box device on the network, or is it a Windows 10 device? And if it is a Windows 10 device, a computer, that essentially is how they would describe it, that then has to fall into our policy. So potentially, as policies change and how devices are understood and used across the organization, that may well change in the future. But to be able to get this rolled out, to give the users the experience they need, I probably see this as a security compromise, to make sure that it did what we needed it to do, but we had to follow certain processes and steps to make sure it was following the policies that were in place at the time.
Okay, thank you. So last question, how is DWP planning to perform ongoing firmware updates on the MTRs and all the peripherals in the rooms?
Okay, so as you can imagine, that's something that we looked at early on to figure out how the best way to do this is. So with the updates, we're basically using the SCCM which is essentially kind of remote deployment and packaging. So we can make sure that firmware updates and kind of MTR app updates are packaged up. They're then pushed out over an SCCM once it's gone through the various test ring cycles that DWP would want to make sure are robustly tested, and then that can be pushed out on a quarterly basis or a 6-monthly basis, depending on the type. So, for example, firmware, where we've got the kind of the Logitech cameras example, you could look at using something like the sync system from Logitech to be able to auto push that out. But again, if you wanted to do it with a more kind of in-house and a testing process, then you can take those firmware updates, build them as part of your SCCM kind of update package, and push that out in a controlled manner where it's really understood which device is getting it when. With regards to the Windows image, then that would be following their own Windows 10 process, but keeping an eye on what Microsoft's certifying on the versioning. So, for example, 1909 is going to be the one that gets pushed out imminently to update the MTRs to the latest version of Windows. That is now supported by Microsoft for 1909. So it's more hard work than if it was just auto did it, absolutely. But the reason it's been done is for a kind of control and security purposes. So that's the things you have to weigh up.
All right, I think that were all questions. Oh no, there's one more coming in. Great case study session, thanks. Does DWP bandwidth network cope with the video traffic? What actions did you take on that front?
Okay, so in a nutshell, yes, it does. The actions that we took were around a network assessment, and that's essentially Microsoft have a standard kind of Teams or Skype Business Network assessment that can be run. We've got that with a few extra pieces in that we look to do as well, just to kind of belt and braces on that. And then we started in sites that we were confident that bandwidth, etc., was suitable. Now, bearing in mind that the usage of Skype Business and Teams has increased, things like screen sharing and video is becoming more prevalent. So there's already plans in place to make sure that the network bandwidth is going to be able to cope for more modern workplace working going forwards, and that the breakouts and that the kind of edge services and things like that are suitable, and tying in with things like how it works with VPN and making sure people are working at home, we're not getting bottlenecks on the network. So it's really key to understand the network early on. Some sites may have a poor link, and that's down to the network has to be in place. If it's not, none of this stuff works. So it's absolutely key. And some areas you might need to look at an upgrade if the site was particularly a small link, for example. But on the whole, we found that the people doing meeting room calls would use video, and they would do content sharing, and it'd be audio. So it'd be a full-blown conference. The network monitoring that was in place, making sure that the traffic routing, but also that the kind of the levels and the capacity within the network were keeping within levels of something that was monitored early on. And as things were ramped out and the calling went up, that was kept a tag on as well. But alongside the MTR, we've got 90,000 people potentially using Teams and Skype. 350 MTRs doesn't make a huge impact because it's essentially sending the same traffic as what a client is sending. So you're not like sending video traffic like an immersive telepresence where you've got a 9 gig pipe going out there which has all of this 4K multi screens going out there. These are really a light footprint for what a video conferencing device historically used to try and output. So yeah, we basically treat them as clients, but with a heavier weighting on video and content share on the modeling. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, we got someone from the audience says, thanks for the comprehensive answers. So that's pretty good. So I think that's all that we have for time, but you still have the option to jump into the breakout session with Alex. If you have any additional questions, I'll post the link in the Q&A. So feel free to join there, and you can talk with Alex then. And for now, we have to close this session. And
thanks very much. And for those that aren't able to jump into the session for any further Q&A, just a quick shameless plug. We've got some free training that we're offering around best practices and kind of applications for such as Planner and OneNote. So feel free to jump on that, and details of this are in the Simity booth as well. So come join us in the breakout session. Thank you very much.